Coach, how you doing?
Pat, how are you, Mr. AD?
I'm doing great. How you been?
Fine.
Yeah. Going back to some memories here?
Yeah, some fond memories. The good, the bad, and everything in between. But these are some of the highlights with those national title trophies. And it brings back a lot of great memories of our fans, of the players we had, and just coaching in general.
Yeah, tell me about that. I mean, what did you always want to be a coach? Is that something you want to do?
Well, it was either go into law or coach, and I wasn't smart enough to be a lawyer. So, no, coaching was it. Had a great high school coach. Of course, my older brother had some influence on it. And as the old saying goes, you follow your passion, what you really want to do, and then you figure out a way to get paid for it. And that's what we tried to do going into this profession.
Well, that's my job, right? To help you guys get paid and follow your passion and do it. Hey, you got a second? Let's go upstairs and talk about a few things.
I do.
Would you? That'd be great.
Anytime with you.
Thanks, Coach.
Better in building a program and creating that kind of culture you want, and what maybe isn't so important.
Yeah, and you know the title of your conversation that we've sent out already to our coaches started with an acronym. And you know, Coach, you and I was a basketball coach. I've always looked up to you and known you, but not really got to know you until I was here. And you know, one of the things that I would say without any reservation is while basketball was your vehicle to influence young men, it's who you are and what you've taught me. Certainly we're going to talk about basketball things, but the neck up stuff, right? And I'd like to start with, can you explain, and maybe for our coaches who are here, you know, for the next couple of hours, we could put you on a scavenger hunt, because you can find this acronym in our building somewhere. It's still painted on a wall, so it's a good scavenger hunt opportunity. But you know, you've built a program around a few letters and what those mean. And would you explain that to our coaches?
I think I know what you're referring
Yeah.
to. It's pretty simple, except it isn't that simple. We called it Jib Elway. And Jib Elway was just that kind of familiar way that our players would hear it and know what we were talking about. And all it stands for is give it your best and live with it. Sounds pretty straightforward when you hear it, but it's more difficult than that. And let's just take it in halves. Give it your best for our players. And this started when I was a high school coach back in Wisconsin Rapids, Lincoln. And I can remember specifically we had a young man who was ready to hit a couple free throws, I hoped, to go to the state tournament. And it was a packed house at the Marshfield Field House. We were going against a really good Medford high school team, lots of size. And when the huddle broke and the crowd was cheering and our players went out, just pulled, his name was Scott Rader. Excellent athlete, good football player, very good basketball player. I could tell he was a little nervous. And I said, Scotty, just give it your best, we'll live with that. Fortunate, I wouldn't tell his story, but he did hit both free throws if he had missed them. And I thought, that's really all that a player should worry about, aside from the details when they go into competition. Giving it your best was not just about on game day. It was about off-season work. It was about practice mentality. It was about trying to do the things that in the end you knew this would make me better, but more importantly our team better. And if you do that, I don't care what profession you go into someday, then you can live with the results. And of course it's a lot easier and more fun when it ends up in victory with some success. But if you don't give it your best, if in the long run you look back and say, I don't think I really worked hard enough in the weight room, I don't think I put enough time in my shot in the off season, whatever it is, whatever sport it is, whatever it is in life, it should bother you. Because when you lose, there'll be people that said, oh boy, you guys did as much as you could, but only your team and your teammates know, did we really do that? And as I look back in the teams I coached, for the most part, they all did that. But there were times where a team I didn't think was giving it its best, or an individual who perhaps wanted more playing time. And when I had those meetings with that athlete or with the team, I'd say, you got to have both parts of this acronym. I want you to live with it, but if you aren't working hard, it should bother you a little bit. To me, that's what that means, Brad. And it's that simple, but it's also that demanding.
Well, and we talk a lot about, as a director of athletics, former coach, somebody who oversees lots of programs, and watched you building intrinsic, right? I mean, we can dangle the carrots and the trophies and the awards and the playing time and all these other things, but so many of our coaches and so many of my career are like, how do I build that? How do I tangibly talk about intrinsic motivation? And when I saw this, when I came here 7 years ago and saw those letters painted on our wall, which I hope you find while you're here, I had no idea what they meant. And then I met you and you said, well, hey, this is this. And I'm like, man, what an easy way to address players and say, because you never know, right? Coach, if you said to me, Brad, are you giving it your very best? You don't know, but I do. And I know whether I admit it to you or not, if I'm giving it my very best. And if I am, then I have to live with whatever external things come my way. And I thought that was a lot of our high school coaches and even our coaches here will come in and say, Brad, how do I get my very best out of players? And I always point them back to this. They put their head on the pillow at night saying, did I give it my very best? Because then you can live with whatever results happen. When you win it, great, right?
It's exactly that. And I would say that of the student athletes that I use that with, there were some who were way too hard on themselves, where I knew they were giving everything they could, and perhaps they weren't having as good a season as they wanted. They were kind of perfectionists, and on those type, you had to lower the temperature a little bit. You had to say, hey, no, you're doing fine. But then there were those who exaggerated their work. Oh yeah, coach, I really worked in the off-season. I was in the weight room, and you find out, once every 2 weeks. Then you had to turn the Bunsen burner up on them and just say, this giving it your best isn't lip service. It's about action. And sooner or later, a team starts to pick up on that. And the very best teams I was able to coach in high school or college had those intrinsic values. And they pushed one another to be better. And that's a good point, what you made about, I think different people interpret it differently at times.
Well, our coaches are going to receive several pieces of information, and it's that you got to take it from paper and apply it. You've talked about that, but you've hit on something, and there's lots of things that we couldn't go over and a lot more that maybe our coaches can reach back out to you. It's fascinating. You mentioned the Rapids basketball, which was one of your first jobs almost 40 years ago, and your eight rocks of success still live today. But you talked about something of when you're talking with players and teams, and you taught me a term 3-4 years ago, and that's their willingness, right? And you have some terms up here, and I want to jump into those because it's such a fascinating way to describe two players tangibly. Where do you fit in this quadrant? So you want to explain what these words up here mean to us, Coach?
Sure. First of all, I owe hearing this to a dear friend who is in the Coast Guard Academy. Not the academy, but he was in the Coast Guard. He got moved up to Admiral. Steve Day, and at the time I first heard it, I was coaching at Wisconsin Rapids Lincoln. He was at Port Edwards. He since has gone on to other things, but he's a lifelong friend, and he said, I think you would like this leadership reminder that we learned in the Coast Guard. And I listened to it, and again, it was one of those simple things that the more I got into it, I said, it means everything. So let me quickly run through it. I think that you can divide most of the athletes you will coach into 4 different categories. Now, this doesn't go into all the detail of their lives and what they're doing in the classroom, although it has something to do with that. It's about what they are about with ability and with the neck up stuff. And so, first category, coaches. This, I think, will be your challenge to get the most out of your team. If you're surrounded by willing and able athletes, you can be the best coach in the world or possibly the worst. And I know none of you who are at this clinic are the worst. You're working on it. But there are some coaches, who knows why they're in it, for the money, they're a little burned out, whatever. But those coaches with willing and able athletes, they're going to get success out of them. Those are the kind of athletes, regardless of circumstances, will play hard. They will do things from a team consciousness. And if you're blessed with mostly those kind of athletes, you ought to thank the Lord every day. Well, then there's the unwilling and unable athlete. And I don't mean to sound harsh, but especially in basketball, I think you have to cut that type of person. Because they really don't have the talent to play. They probably did not work on it at all, but it was kind of popular. I'm going to be part of the basketball team. They're unwilling to do the things that are necessary. And when that happens, not only does their head get in the way, so does their ability to play the game. So perhaps they can find something else to do, but it's just a tough thing. Now we get to, I think, the two most difficult. It's the willing but unable basketball player. I thought those were the most fun athletes to coach. And I'll tell you why. Again, from the neck up, they would do anything to improve. They probably know because of their willingness to take some criticism, to take some suggestions, what they had to work on. But the big thing is, their inability is what drove them to become able. They perhaps weren't going to be the best players on your team, but are they going to be great role players? Are they going to be the kind of people, the kind of players who really love to set the defense? Because there are a lot of basketball players whose offensive skills aren't perhaps as good as they'd like to be, but they can get after it on defense. And they're popular on a team because of their attitude and the fact that they normally accept their role. They know that there are probably more talented players on the team and that they're there as much for what's between the ears as they are with the body talent. This last one, I hate to say it, but this is the one that gets coaches in trouble. This is the one that in today's society, with all the social media, with all the pressure that comes from the outside, and I retired 17 years ago. Social media was around, but not like it is today. These are the players who have ability. They really do. But there's something standing in the way of them becoming great team players, becoming the kind of players who seem to get better throughout their career. And it's just their laziness, their mental approach. Maybe that came out of this, you must be task-oriented with that kind of athlete. Oftentimes what they want is more attention because of their attitude, which takes away from the rest of your practice. And the lesson, I guess, in the military was when you tell that person who is capable, could do the job, but it's something that's holding them back, and it's usually a mental attitude. Here's the deal. You perform this task well, and we move on. And we will not get on you. But if you don't, you're going to sit. And if you start trying to explain it all the time, after you've explained it for the first time, you're wasting time. And don't kid yourself. Other players on your team will notice that. So when they're doing well, certainly you can compliment that this is what we expect. You have that ability. And when they're not, and you know it's because of ill preparation, it's because they just didn't prepare the way they should, be task-oriented with them. And if that doesn't work, then you have a major decision to make about playing time or should they remain on the team.
Yeah.
Now that in general is what that's all about. And it helped me at a time when I thought, you know what, I think we can save everybody. I think we can get everybody to be just 100% dedicated to what we're trying to do as a team. And you come to a final conclusion, and we got plenty of those willing people, but it's the unwilling that's tough. And like I said, the unwilling and unable, they're usually gone from a team. But you keep this kind around thinking someday they'll reach their potential.
Yeah, and you know what I like and why we started here is I think a lot of times coaches, I mean, today you're going to hear from Nick and he's going to do some defensive stuff and Matt's going to do all kinds of drills and putting things together, but it's this conversation, it's the office, and how do I get to the willing? And I think what these two things do is allows a coach an opportunity to give something tangible, of are you giving it your best? Are you doing that? And then, where are you on this willing scale? Let's talk about that. Now, the able, and we've got a lot of things we want to talk about. One of the stories I admire the most is actually Nick. When he came, very good high school player. But you've often said Nick was very willing, maybe one of the most willing athletes you ever coached. His off-season workouts here were legendary. People still talk about them. But his able wasn't, as a freshman, wasn't maybe as able as he was going to be. And then he left here an All-American and a two-time national champion, and that was somebody who was willing somewhere on the able, but not here and left here. So it gave you and gave your program something to point to, and maybe your players something to point to of where do I sit on this willing and on this able. Coach, as we transition, and you're building a team, right? So we've got coaches out here, all levels, that are trying to build program. You start, your number one core is be who you are. Talk about that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be who you are?
Well, before I even get to that, what you just said, we had different kinds of postseason awards. The Passion Award, the Unselfish Award. We also had a Dedication Award. And Nick, and this doesn't cause me, I might not have voted for him every year, but every year the players voted him the Dedication Award. And that was because he came in as a good high school player, but he had to dedicate himself, get stronger, get a little bit quicker. And he got quite a bit, but he had a long way to go. And he worked on his shot left and right. So he got voted that 4 years in a row. And I think if I was an employer, when I'm hiring somebody, that might be one of the first things. You're not always going to get people who are at their peak. He knew he had to do that. I would also mention my nephew, I think a few people know, Tony Bennett. He worked his tail off on his shot, and through his 9th grade year, that was right here in Stevens Point when my brother was coaching here, then went to Green Bay and became a player, and now he's coaching in a fairly tough conference, the ACC, but it was his dedication. It was also my older son's dedication at Rhinelander and down here, and then he dedicated himself to a profession of medicine. Kathy, and you know Kathy very well, her dedication was there until she had it all along, but a knee surgery kind of stopped her from playing continuously at that level. So that's what really is important, really important. But when you asked about the last part of your question.
Be who you are, right?
Being who you are was the phony characters, and I don't care if this is in sports, on a job, friends you make, you can detect genuineness, people who are really caring about others, and then the individuals who are saying things only to bring it back to themselves pretty quickly. And on a team, the best players are the ones who have that genuineness. And I don't mean that these sometimes aren't players who have a little cockiness to them. They really are confident in themselves. They are who they are. But they also understand, I've got players who are helping make us better, and I better pay attention to them. And being who you are is what I think makes the most united team possible. Because if you got a lot of phoniness on the team, it'll show up in the locker room, it'll show up on a bus ride, it'll show up when you're not even on the practice floor. But it really is important that they are who they are, because that, in my mind, tends to foster confidence. I'm not trying to be somebody else. I'm being who I am. I know I gotta make some improvements, but I'm not gonna get carried away with over cockiness, overconfidence, but I'm not gonna beat myself up to the point where I just don't believe anymore.
And don't you think that translates to coaches too? You know, what coaching is there's a genuineness to being a great coach. This is who I am, right? This is who I am as a human. This is where I care. This is what I care about. This is why I care about you. And you know, having watched it as a director of athletics, there are a lot of different personalities that win, right? But there are characteristics that are tied into each of those winners, right? About caring and, you know, and you talk about in your rocks, there's several of them, and our coaches will get this, the game being overcoached and undertaught. And we've said that forever, right? That's something we've heard, but I think the way you've conceptualized that really has opened my eyes to how to explain that to people. When you say that, the game is overcoached and undertaught, what do you mean by that?
Well, and again, I think there are outsiders. I mean, whatever you would think of Coach Knight, Bobby Knight, he simplified the game. It was motion offense. It was defensive principles that weren't complicated, not doing too much. My brother taught it that way. He spent so much time on defense to start with that I'm sure some of those early teams here, and when he took over, said, well, what about us, you know, scrimmaging? What about spending more time on shots? All of those things are done in breakdown drills, and you can't cheat yourself on that. But it comes down to the kinds of things that will make the team good, that will make the individual good, because of how you deal with those things. Whole part method. Many of the things that you teach in basketball have to be shown in the whole. It can be done 4-on-4 drills, 5-on-5, numerical disadvantage drills, especially on defense when you put 5 against 7. Then there are the skills, especially passing and shooting skills, that you break down. I know that I had an assistant here my last few years who came in, and he was a very good coach, an excellent player, who came in, and he told one of my assistants who had been with me for a while, the first couple of weeks, he said, is this all we do? Is this what, well, we spend so much time on passing drills and finding the open window, and then we spend so much time on stance, defensive stance, and on square ups. And well, you know, when are we going to start scrimmaging? When are we going to start really playing? And I think the one assistant said to him, just hang on here. Just give it a time. And you may think you're pressured. Well, we got our first game in a couple of weeks. And high school coaches, it is tougher with you. Yeah. We have a lot more time in college to spend that time on those fundamentals. But don't cheat yourself out of it. Put the building blocks together about the whole, the part method, the individual work, and I would say spend a little more time on the individual and part method, and then get to the whole method as you get closer to the first game. There's always time to at least put some competitive scrimmaging in, but let's just say it's a 2.5 hour practice. Maybe that should only be about 15 minutes to start with, instead of, well, we're going to spend a half hour to an hour just going up and down or whatever. You really do need to organize your practice. And the more experience you get, I think you sometimes lean on, well, we've done this year after year after year, and that's fine. Lean on your expertise, but every team is a little bit different. Every team has an individual personality to it, and that might be the way you tweak your practices. So I'm trying to say something this way. be firm in your principles. By no means, when we did this, and Brad mentioned, do I want every coach out there to think, well, this is the only way to do things. It isn't. You have to do what you believe in. But if what you believe in isn't getting the maximum out of the talent you have, maybe it's because their fundamental work isn't up to snuff. But yeah, they're competitive because we scrimmage a lot. Mm-hmm. Or if they're not competitive enough, maybe you are doing too much in the individual breakdown, and you just think to build toughness, we've got to spend a little more time on competitive scrimmaging. Mm-hmm. It's a feel method, and you sometimes get the feel as you see a team progress, and maybe the way your team is playing. I think one of the most important times of the year are those first 5-6 games. You will get to know your team's personality as much as anything after that.
When you're developing a philosophy, one of the things you've talked to me about and really helped me reimagine the way I watch practices, right? Or I would coach my own practices, is that you had said something to me, I don't know, we have a lot of conversations, so somewhere along the lines of practice doesn't lie. It will reveal where you believe, what you believe in, right? And how do you take what you have as a philosophy and stay true to yourself, but implement that into practice to be who you are?
Well, it does come back to knowing your team and knowing what you really believe in. Mm-hmm. And I probably gave it away a little bit at the last part. To be firm in what you expect and believe a team should be about, but yet being flexible enough to adjust it to each team. Sometimes teams are like children. You could have 7, 8 kids, and they all have their similarities, mm-hmm. but they also have their own individual quirks and individual personalities. And so you get to know your team from that. And it really does come down to that ability to say, fellas, gals, tonight we just have to get back to fundamentals. Mm-hmm. I know we have a big picture of how we want to play, but we can't get to it because we're turning the ball over too many times. Mm-hmm. We're just not sharing the ball the way we want it to be shared. Hey, defensively, we've done breakdown drills where a lot of you can guard one-on-one, you're quick enough, but we don't understand what it means to get in the gaps, to be in a help side position where we cover up for people who get beat and we recover back to the person we're guarding. No, instead, you're all out there kind of guarding your own person, and it's like we're out there on an island. There comes so many times in practices and then watching game tape or practice tape, a lot of people tape their practices, where you can see what is not working, and again, it will usually come down to, well, the willing and able, who aren't always perfect, it's just because they don't understand it as well. The willing and unable, they don't have all the ability, but they need to be coached. But the unwilling and able, they're doing it because something's getting in the way of their effort, of their passion for the sport, of their ability to be coached and to really work on it. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to understand what motivates individuals. There's ways to motivate a collective team, but then there are those private meetings with individuals where you lay it out. This is where you're falling short. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it is the mental part, sometimes it's the physical, and you have to understand what they really need instead of just blurbing out generalities that they go, I've heard this before.
So I'm going to ask you something.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes 100% sense. And I've never asked you this question, so I'm really interested in a lot of this you and I have spent a lot of time on and dived deeper into. You know, your family in general, who have been all successful coaches, first of all, I've said this to you. You guys don't get enough credit for how great you were offensively. You know, there's a Bennett, the Bennett ball is a defensive thing, right? But I want to stay on the defensive side of the ball. I think every coach, myself included, preach similar things. Pack line, up the line, on the line. You can do, defense can be who you are. You don't have to play pack line defense, but Bennett ball is pack line defense. But one of the things that I've watched Dick, Kathy, Nick, Tony, yourself build is team defense. Team, and that there's one word that I think if I was going to describe watching Nick at St. Kate or your films of yours or playing against Kathy, those players trusted each other on the defensive end of the ball. It takes a lot of trust, right? Somebody's going to get my gap, there's help there. How did you or your family, when you're sitting around Thanksgiving dinner, or whatever that may mean, how did you build the trust in one another to believe that I can go do this because I know I got 4 people behind me that will help me be a great defensive team?
That's a great question. We could spend the whole session on this and still go another hour.
Yeah, right.
The first thing that I would say is you as a coach have to decide first and foremost, where are you going to start your defense? If you believe in full court pressure, you're going to pick up baseline to baseline, or even half court pressure. Great. As long as you think you've got the quickness and you can get back into a solid half court defense. I've seen a lot of teams who do press. College teams, high school. You don't see that many pro teams doing it because they're going against such good ball handlers. But that's going to have something to do with what you just talked about. I think full court pressure may have to be used at the end of the game if you got to speed up things, you're behind. It's just part of your philosophy. But you've got a whole court to cover. There's more room to get caught in Never Never Land, in soft positions. So then it's decided we'll pick up half court. Now we only have half the court to cover. You can still get overextended. And when you do, it's just a little more distance instead of deciding now with the three-point arc that we are going to fight like the devil to keep the ball from easily getting into the paint. From easily being, I should erase this, just the half court part. In the half court, you do have less area to cover. And so the gaps are a little shorter. They're always post, and post defense is a whole different ball game. So the gaps here are shorter instead of a gap on the full court where you get beat, and you better, if you're going to get beat in full court, sprint your rear end back to get into the solid lane defense. My brother coined the term pack line. And he said, it's when he was coaching at Green Bay, because he thought, well, the Packers, people will buy it. Somehow it's going to be connected with that. But it is exactly it. It's packing the lane. It's packing the paint where the most damage is done. Now the other part is with the improvement and the emphasis on the three-point shot. Now you have to work on closeouts when the ball goes into the post and maybe it's kicked to a weak side person. Well, that distance where you're on the help must be such, foot in the lane, that you can get out with high hands, that you can get out to the shooter by anticipating, not by reacting, not by just staring at the ball. Now you see it, Pat, now I'll react. It's got to be anticipation. And if we use this term, I know my players here would say, I wish I had a buck every time you used it, whether we were in our zone, 1-3-1, or man-to-man, was air time. Air time. When the pass is made, that ball's in the air for a certain amount of time. That's when you're on the move. That's when you start adjusting. That's when you will get to the person you're covering in man-to-man or in a zone just in time to really pressure them instead of you've given them a little too much room. Great shooters, that's all they want. Disrupt the rhythm. Still jam it when they try to beat you off the dribble. When they use the high screen, there are all kinds of ways to play the screen. Do you want to step out early, help, go over it? Do you want to switch it? Do you want to go under the screen? That's up to you coaches. But I think you have to look at the final goal of your defense. If it's to get lots of turnovers, you'll live with probably giving up easier baskets now and then. But yeah, we created 15, 20 turnovers. If that's good enough, go with it. But I've seen too many teams that try that, and then their half-court defense is just, it's mediocre. It's soft. And when they really need big stops, they do it with their defense. That doesn't mean the offense isn't important, but I've seen more games won and lost just by great defense or average defense than even great shooting or average shooting. Somehow when people are getting good shots and they're good shooters, part of it's because the defense broke down.
Let me ask you this, Coach, and I know there's no perfect answer, but just in generalities, how much, going into game day, how much did you rely on Pointer, Rhinelander, Rapids, base defense, versus this opponent adjustment?
Well, there always is some
Of course.
opponent adjustment. Yeah, I don't want anyone to think, you mean you play the same way regardless who you're playing? No, we scouted teams. If a team couldn't shoot real well, we knew we really could pack it in. We really would protect against penetration. If a team had a minimal inside game, you know, every team should have some threat inside, but it's minimal. And again, the game has really changed. If you watch a lot of college games and high school games, and certainly the pro game, there used to be really big, solid interior players all the time. There still are some, but the game has turned into more of let's move it till we get the three-point shot. The three-point shot is a thing of beauty. It's improved the game as long as decent shooters are taking it. There are way too many poor shooters who knows is in their ear saying, well, you got to get yourself open for a three. So-and-so on the team's getting a couple. That's where you've got to identify the roles on your team. And when you play against that kind of team, of course you adjust your defense. Today, we're going to pressure a little higher out on that three-point arc. You may even pick up at half court to disrupt their rhythm. No, this team is not a great three-point shooting team or outside shooting team. We are truly going to play tough on their excellent post player or their high-low game. We'll bring that weak side in. We will double team the post if they get it and rotate. That's all that goes into it. And I know this may sound like, holy cow, you're going to make all those adjustments. Perhaps in high school, you don't have to make all those adjustments. The talent level is still developing. And even at the college level, they're not all great players, but there are enough good players that you better cover everything out there, or at least make it difficult for them.
Non-negotiable top three. Jack Bennett takes the clipboard today, you know, because our coaches, primarily our high school coaches who are here with us and are going to see this, sometimes you have 7 practices, right? 8 practices, got to play somebody. And obviously on day 8, you're not going to be who you want to be in March when you're trying to play at the Cole Center or trying to play at the Rush Center or the girls' side. But, you know, if you were going to say, if your guys just got back together, right? You had guys that you coached 30, 40 years ago now playing golf, and, you know, and I get a chance to know you like that. And I know it's about relationships. But those guys, I would bet you, would say the same thing Nick would say, that Jay would say from Rhinelander, that everybody would say, these are the 3 things that we will not bend on. You know, yeah, we may game plan differently, we may close out differently, we may high hands or double posts or whatever. But what if you were going to say to these coaches, hey, from my standpoint, these would be the couple of things we would say are non-negotiable things for us?
First of all, those things that are important to your program and to the cohesiveness of it can't be too many non-negotiables. It can't be, here are 25 things that we just won't put up with. We're not going to tolerate. I mean, here are the simple ones. You will not be late for practice. You know, if there is a legitimate reason, you're kept after in a class, you have to do something family-wise, it's a religious commitment, you better talk to us first and let us know. Not show up and say, well, I was late here because, and then you're making something up you find out. That's something we're not gonna talk about, and somehow you're gonna prove to me that I shouldn't be upset about it. Selfishness. I mean, we talked about a lot of that no matter what our talent level is, we can control the unity, the unselfishness that we play with. And so if we start to see players who are out there on their own agenda, they're shooting too much, they aren't putting forth in the defensive end, I mean, all of those are teachable moments, but it comes back to they're just being selfish. They're moody. They're okay as long as they're playing well. No, we're not gonna negotiate this. Your attitude is not good, and I know you can be better than that. Now, sometimes a player will come in, just had a bad night. I had a bad time. Classes were hard. My family's going through something. Coaches, you got to be understanding of that. I don't mean you're a dictator. You know, it's not my way or the highway, but it is some standards that these players know. You know what? They're not going to tolerate this. Classroom. Not everybody's smart. Not everybody's going to get straight A's. But if you start getting reports from teachers, you know, your player's just a jerk off in class. Never pays attention. Always screwing around. That's not going to be put up with. You'll talk to them. You'll say, yeah, you know, you may think, well, I practice hard. Yeah, but there's other things to this. Whatever is important to you and what you think is what I won't tolerate should be clearly explained and then held to it. But please don't put in 15, 20 different things that waters down what's really important. If that makes sense.
And it makes 100% sense. You know, what are our core philosophies? Be who you are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the, you know, and coaches, you're going to receive this. I just find this fascinating. And if you don't mind, give me 1 second. I'm going to read this. One, we versus they.
Now, the other thing I'll tell you, this was done in 1977.
Well, you
First year at Rap. Were you going to
You
talk?
gave my punchline
All right,
away.
go ahead.
Yeah, that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
But you
Sorry,
know, this is fascinating because this is 1977, Coach.
Yeah.
Is that right? We versus they. Set our defense. Stop ball penetration. Recover to our man. Hard, smart board play. Convert defense. Convert to offense. Sharp, crisp, purposeful movement on offense. Good shot selection. Enthusiasm tempered by emotional stability. I mean, 2022, 2020, 2030, these 8 things. I mean, you handed this to me, and I know, you know, not all of you have, this is pre-recorded, you'll see. Coach gave me this yesterday, day before, and I read it, like, I didn't read the top first, I read the 1 through 8, I'm like, oh, well, this is probably point stuff near the end of your career, because we could use this today. And you're like, Brad, this was from 1977. Like, oh my God, this is, you know, so as I read these, like the core philosophies of basketball haven't changed, but the one question I do think matters on here, the 1 through 7 we kind of get. Talk to us about enthusiasm tempered by emotional stability. What does that mean to you?
Let me tell you, some of this was influenced by my wife. She could watch my teams, high school, college. They're selfish out there. You know, they're just not in her own way. Now, most of these were at least generated and thought by my brother. And this was about the year, this was the second year Dick took over here at Point. And we talked quite a bit about what do you got to do to get it going. And I just thought, as I listened to him, as I would read Dean Smith's idea of team unity, you know, Bobby Knight's was a little more tough, but good ideas about team unity. I said, well, here are the 8 things I want to get started on if we're going to build this program. I want our players to know what are the things that will stand the test of time from program year to year. Of course, each year is a little different with teams and their personality, but these things don't change that much. And it became easier for me when I took over a program to point the really general important things out to them than to dive into the details so much that they lost sight of what the real important things were. And it's a trick to how much breakdown, how much detail, and then how much do you build back up to the whole part, to the whole method. This was my way of saying, here are the 8 things that will be important. I don't care if we play man, zone, if we're running a pattern offense with 15 different specials, or running motion, which is more reaction. These are the things that will be important. And that last part, it's probably meant more for me than the players. And that is enthusiasm tempered by emotional stability. There are probably some times, and some of them are officials who are my friends now, that I let emotions get away. I think that happens perhaps in an Italian family. Now I think our kid, my brother and I, we were a little more that way. I think our children probably learned the positive lessons and that's why they're a little more controlled. You got to be who you are, and you can't be somebody else. But this emotional enthusiasm tempered by emotional stability, if you really practice that, in the end, I thought win, lose, draw, great season, not as good as you want, you could have peace of mind. That you could look back and say, you know what, we really did have great kids. We weren't as talented as from one year to the next, but they gave us everything they could. I tried to coach the best way possible, a little different motivational devices because they were a little different from last year's team or whatever. That's what that's all about. Instead of holding yourself to a standard, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And yet, there is an architecture, a foundation to a program that does last, that you do stick to, that you tweak it, you change it a little bit, but you don't throw it out because it's the foundation to the culture you're trying to build. And I just read this 2 weeks ago, Coach Fran Fucilla, he was talking about, this term culture and identity is being thrown around left and right. And for some programs and some teams and coaches, it really is stuck to. But he said, in his own way, he said, he gets invited to practices, and he said, I could go to a practice, and after a half hour to an hour, after I heard what they said they wanted their culture to be about, the practice proved to me that's not what they're working towards. Who knows? Maybe he wanted more breakdown work. Maybe he saw kids out there who were slacking in detail work. It's how you practice. It's how you go into a game. It's how you treat one another after a game. I think as the 33, 34 years I coached, most of the teams I had were excellent. I could see they were excellent on the court and off. And then there were those few teams, and a lot of times it was one of the more talented teams. And afterwards, as I examined it and found out from some of the leaders on the team, it was the emotional stability that was lost. It was their relationships with one another. It was somebody being too sarcastic with a teammate. It was perhaps parents. Perhaps it was fans that got into their ear. Perhaps it's social media now where people can communicate stuff that me as a coach, I don't look at too much of that, but those kids are looking at it and it destroys unity. And you're wondering why isn't this team as close as I thought they would be? And so that's what that really means.
You know, and I guess we'll finish, maybe finish, but talk about, because I've heard you talk about it, your nephew, Tony's done a tremendous job, and he's a tremendous human. That night they lose the 116 game, and everybody remembers him winning a national championship the next year. But talk about, if you remember, you do, that journey, those kids won a couple of games in that next year to win a national championship, and nights where it was over. Game was done. They were not going to win, and they found a way. How much do you think it was that? It was that emotional stability, that give it your best and live with it, the peace of mind, the be who you are, that never rocked those kids on their way to winning a championship. You've talked about that. Give it to us from your perspective on how maybe that championship was won the year before with that loss.
Well, it was a tremendous temperament by Tony, by some of the leaders on his team. I mean, we look at it now and probably minimize it. That was crushing. The first 16 to beat a 1. And I saw Tony in his interview and I thought, Lord, he's amazingly controlled right now. I don't want to get too much into spiritual stuff, but I'll tell you what it really comes down to. Paul's saying, rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering and tribulation, and be constant in prayer. All three things. Tony wasn't about, and I think good coaches, about to sell out all hope for the future after a terrible disappointment. I mean, it'll be talked about forever. First 16 to beat 1. And I kind of knew afterwards how difficult it was. I know my brother that said the bus ride coming back, where'd they play that game? Wherever it was, to the hotel, they were starting to get threats from bookies, from the bettors, who say, you just lost me money. And I think the players were reading that. And just to put that in perspective, don't listen to that stuff. To just keep hope alive. And I'm sure he said, we were better than this. We didn't play that way. I'm putting words in his mouth. I know what a coach and a team talk about. That's personal. You keep that there. Be patient in suffering. More than anything, instead of panicking and saying, oh, the system didn't work. This team came out and blitzed us. I mean, they didn't just get beat. They got beat bad that night. But then that next year, they came back, and you're right. I forget the early tournament game where they got down 14 to, who was it?
Yeah, I can't
Whoever
remember.
it was.
Yeah.
I thought, oh no, if this happens again. And they didn't panic. They came back and won. And then they won a couple miracle games to get there, especially the Purdue game. It worked. And then being constant in prayer, whether it's strict prayer, whether it's just meditation, whether it's you talk about attitude to yourself and about what are the lessons we learn, it's hard, but it had to be done. And if you read any articles or saw any of the interviews with his players, they probably explained it well, that we never panicked. We felt like crap after the game, to put it in terms, but we weren't beaten up. And we knew we were going to be criticized by the media, by the press, but we weren't going to give up on how we're doing things, how we believe in one another. And I had a feeling sometime in the future, they're going to win it all. A little doubt comes in when you get beat like that, but never expected it would be that very next year. And that's what made that story so amazing, so heartwarming.
And it just comes back to that constant trust in being who you are. Your number one rock, be who you are, right? And believe in that. And I've seen that, and that's what I admire in getting to know you. You are who you are. When I watch our coaches and talk with younger coaches, you also find that philosophy and be who you are and live with that, right? Yeah. Give it your best and live with it. And I finished with some of that stuff there with Tony, because it's such a public way of saying, listen, this is who Virginia basketball is. Yeah. This is who I am, and we're going to live with that. And they did. Yeah.
He tweaked some things offensively. He understands how the three-point game is kind of taking over, but they certainly were going to believe in the system as much as possible. And I do understand that when he talks to his dad's a little more old school about things, and when he says get back to it, I know that Tony and Nick tells me the same thing. they do move ahead, because they're younger coaches a bit, but they maintain that foundation. And winning and losing alone can't be what dictates what you truly believe in. It'll certainly make you think about, is this working? Do we have enough talent? Is it an attitudinal thing? Is it a physical deficiency? But you cannot just 1 year to the next change. There are so many videos, and I hate to, championship videos are great. They've got so many of them. And if you are in the off season and you just want to learn basketball, go through as many as possible. If it's a month before the season, you're trying to figure out, just zero on one or two that'll help you. The winning and losing part has so much to do with it. And I just wanted to quote, John Wooden said it, the courage and wisdom part, where he said, it's not who is right, but what is right. And you listen to your assistants, and I've been blessed with great assistants here at Point, in high school, throughout all my years, and assistants oftentimes will see things with a little more perspective, and you don't always take everything they say, but you listen to it because it is, and players sometimes will give you the best insight. And then Al McGuire said one of the greatest emotion in sport is winning, and the second greatest is losing. And if, I think what you're asking about my nephew, his emotions came very close together, both in victory and in crushing defeat. And that's what I think gave his players the belief, the confidence that we're going to come back and we're going to be a good team, and if things go our way, we'll have another shot at this thing. It's not that simple, really, but in some cases it is, where you trust your leadership, you trust your teammates, you trust the system.
Yeah. You know, Coach, I want to thank you. You know, when coaches, when you see this, Coach will be on the other side of a small procedure, and I will tell you this, it crushed him that he couldn't be with you, right?
Okay, I do apologize, because if you fall asleep in the middle of this, don't worry about it. I hope there's something that you got out of it. I'm willing to talk to anybody. I know the WBCA has just resurrected their mentorship program. Asked me to be a part of it. Jared Pettigrew, Forrest Larson, Tom Desitel, to name a few, all really solid coaches that would give advice, especially to younger coaches. Take advantage of it. You never stop learning about what this game is all about, but do it from a standpoint. Here is what's important to us. Here's our foundation, and here's how we'll alter it. Here's how we'll change it. Here's how we'll make some adjustments based on the talent from year to year and based what we think will give our team the best chance to be successful. That's all you can do as a coach.
You know, and so if you're looking to, if you need more advice from Coach, I will say this. He's the first, whenever the phone rings, he's the first to pick up. He loves to share the game. He loves to share in his experience. And before we finish, I do want to congratulate you. I'm not sure how many of you know, Coach was inducted into the WIC Hall of Fame this summer, right here in Stevens Point, along with his brother and Jordan Zimmerman. And, you know, he's a Wisconsin Coaches Association Hall of Famer. He's a UWSP Hall of Famer. And I will tell you, he's a Hall of Fame human. So I'm lucky to call you a friend, Coach, and thank you again.
I was lucky to go in with my brother and Jordan Zimmerman, and then they had to stick me with it. Jordan Zimmerman, who I had in class, played 9 years in the major leagues, but that was an honor, and I know a big part of that was because of you as athletic director, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, thank you for coming to the clinic. Coach, thanks for being a part of it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Coach.